I always thought forging someone's signature was something that only happened in movies, the kind of thing reserved for con artists and soap opera villains, until the day I found my own name attached to a $90,000 loan I never signed. It started almost 7 months earlier, on a Sunday afternoon that should have been ordinary. My younger sister, Priya, had just gotten engaged to her boyfriend of 3 years, a sweet, quiet guy named Arjun who worked in software and had never once, in all the time I'd known him, given me a reason to doubt his intentions toward her. I was genuinely happy for them. I remember hugging Priya so tight she laughed and told me to let go before I wrinkled her dress. Remember crying a little at the sight of the modest little ring on her finger. Remember thinking, for a fleeting moment, that maybe this would be a season of good things for our family after years of quiet tension. That feeling didn't last long. Within weeks, the wedding planning had ballooned into something that resembled a corporate merger more than a celebration of love. Priya, egged on by our mother, who had spent decades attending other people's lavish weddings and quietly resenting that her own had been modest, began describing a vision that kept expanding by the day. First it was a nice venue upstate. Then it was a 500-guest destination wedding at a vineyard in the Hudson Valley. Then it was a designer lehenga being flown in directly from a boutique in Mumbai, professional dance choreographers for the Sangeet, a 5-tier cake from a bakery that required a deposit larger than my monthly rent. I watched the number climb from a text thread I was added to called Priya's Big Day Ring, watching vendor quotes and mood boards pile up until the full estimated cost crossed the $250,000 mark. And then, on a Tuesday evening in March, I got a call from my mother asking me to come over for dinner, to talk as a family. I should have known from her tone that this wasn't a casual invitation. We sat around the same dining table I'd eaten at my whole childhood, my father at the head like always, my mother serving food she barely touched herself, Priya sitting across from me with an expression that was trying very hard to look casual and failing. After the plates were cleared, my father cleared his throat in the particular way he did when he was about to say something rehearsed. "We wanted to talk to you about contributing to your sister's wedding," he said. "We were thinking around $40,000 would really help cover the venue and catering." I remember the specific way my stomach dropped, the way the room seemed to tilt slightly, like I'd misheard him. $40,000. Not a token gift, not a few thousand toward the flowers or the DJ, $40,000, nearly a quarter of my entire savings I had rebuilt slowly and painfully over 4 years after my divorce, had left me starting almost completely over in my early 30s. I tried to explain, as calmly as I could, that I simply didn't have that kind of money to give without seriously jeopardizing my own financial security. I told them I loved Priya, that I wanted to help in smaller, meaningful ways, maybe cover the flowers, maybe pay for her bridal party's hair and makeup, maybe contribute $5,000, which still felt generous to me. But $40,000 simply wasn't something I could hand over without undoing years of careful rebuilding. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an hour, though it was probably only seconds. My mother was the first to speak, her voice sharp in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "So, you'd rather keep your money in some savings account than help your own sister have the wedding she deserves?" "It's not about deserving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about what I can actually afford without putting myself in a terrible position." "You make good money," my father said. "You don't have kids, you don't have a mortgage anymore since the divorce. What exactly are you saving it for?" The comment about my divorce landed like a slap, casually cruel in the way only family can be, tossing my worst years back at me like they were evidence against me instead of the very reason I was protecting what I'd rebuilt. I looked at Priya, hoping she might step in, might soften things, might say she understood. Instead, she stared down at the tablecloth, arms crossed, and finally said, quietly, "I just thought family was supposed to show up for each other." I left that dinner early, shaking, feeling like I'd been ambushed in a room I thought was safe. For the next 2 weeks, Priya didn't speak to me at all, not a text, not a call. Radio silence dressed up as heartbreak. My mother sent a few pointed messages about how disappointed she was, how she never imagined I'd be this kind of person. My father, usually more measured, simply stopped calling altogether. I told myself this was just a painful rift, the kind that happens in every family when boundaries get tested for the first time. I told myself it would blow over eventually, that Priya and I had too much history to let a wedding, even one this expensive, permanently fracture us. I went back to my normal life. Work, therapy on Wednesdays, quiet dinners alone in my apartment, slowly trying to convince myself the tension would fade the closer the wedding date came. It didn't occur to me, not even once, that anyone in my family would go further than cold silence and pointed comments. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in late June, while I was at my desk finishing up a report before a client call, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, a 1 to 800 prefix that usually meant a telemarketer. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. "Hi, is this?" The woman on the line said my name, "calling from First Meridian Bank regarding your personal loan account. I'm following up on a payment discrepancy." I remember laughing, actually laughing, thinking it was some kind of scam call, the kind where someone tries to convince you of a fake account to fish for personal information. "I don't have a loan with your bank," I said, already reaching to hang up. "I understand this might be unexpected," she continued, her tone carefully professional, "but our records show a personal loan disbursed on your name in the amount of $90,000, open this past April. I'm calling because the linked payment account has had 2 missed automatic withdrawals." The laugh died in my throat. "That's not possible. I've never applied for a loan like that in my life." She read off a partial social security number to verify the account, and my stomach turned to ice as the last 4 digits matched mine exactly. She read off an address, my old address, the apartment I'd lived in with my ex-husband, not my current one, and then my employer's name, correctly, the same one printed on my pay stubs. "I need you to send me everything," I said, my voice barely steady. "Every document, every signature, everything tied to this loan. Immediately." When the paperwork arrived by email an hour later, I sat frozen at my desk, scrolling through pages of loan agreements, disclosures, and a signature page with my name signed in dark blue ink. I zoomed in on my laptop screen until the letters blurred, staring at a signature that was almost mine, close enough that I understood exactly why a bank clerk hadn't questioned it, but wrong in the small, specific ways that only someone who had watched me sign my name hundreds of times over the years would know how to replicate. The loop on my capital J curled in the wrong direction. The underline beneath my last name slanted upward instead of flat, the way mine never did. My mind raced through everyone who had ever seen me sign something up close, enough times to study the shape of it without realizing they were studying it at all. And then it landed, cold and immediate, on the one person who still had a manila folder of my old documents sitting in a drawer at my parents' house, copies of my license, old lease agreements, papers from years ago when I'd asked him to help me handle some paperwork while I was traveling for work. My father. I didn't call him. I didn't call my mother, and I certainly didn't call Priya. I sat there with that signature glowing on my laptop screen, feeling something inside me shift from disbelief into a very quiet, very controlled kind of resolve. I picked up my phone, and instead of dialing anyone in my family, I searched for a fraud investigator near me and made the first call that would begin unraveling exactly what my family had done and why. I didn't call anyone in my family that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the fraudulent loan documents still glowing on the screen, and I made a list, the way I do when panic threatens to take over and I need to feel like I have some control over what happens next. Fraud investigator. Bank's security division. Copies of every document. Credit freeze. Attorney, eventually, though I didn't let myself think that far ahead yet. The fraud investigator I found, a woman named Renata who specialized in identity theft cases, called me back within an hour of my email, which told me either she was very good at her job or my case had immediately raised enough red flags to warrant urgency. I explained everything, the wedding, the argument over the $40,000, the 2 weeks of silence, and then the phone call from the bank about a loan I had never applied for. I told her about the signature, the way it was close enough to fool a bank teller but wrong in details only someone intimately familiar with my handwriting would replicate. "Do you have any reason to believe someone close to you might have had access to your documents?" she asked, her voice even, professional, clearly having asked this question to 100 shaken, disbelieving clients before me. I told her about the folder. Years earlier, while I was traveling frequently for a consulting project, I'd given my father a scanned copy of my driver's license and a few other documents just in case he ever needed to help me handle something urgent while I was out of the country, a package that needed signing for, a delivery that required ID verification, something forgettable and mundane at the time. I hadn't thought about that folder in years. I certainly never imagined it sitting in a drawer at my parents' house, waiting to become a weapon. Renata didn't say much in response beyond assuring me she'd begin pulling records immediately, but I could hear something careful in her silence, the sound of someone who had seen enough cases like mine to know exactly where this was likely headed, and was choosing not to say it outright until she had proof. The next 2 weeks moved with a strange, dissonant rhythm, panic on the inside, forced normalcy on the outside. I went to work every day, sat through meetings, smiled at coworkers, all while quietly working through a nightmare that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I froze my credit across all 3 bureaus. I filed a police report, even though the officer taking my statement seemed skeptical that a family member could be behind something this serious, gently suggesting I talk to my relatives directly first before escalating things, advice I politely declined to follow. I wasn't interested in giving anyone a chance to destroy evidence before it could be examined properly. Renata's investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 10 days, she'd obtained the full loan file from First Meridian Bank's fraud division, including the scanned driver's license used during the application process, the same photo, the same old apartment address, the exact scan quality of a document that had clearly been sitting untouched in a drawer for years before someone dug it out and used it. She'd also pulled the wire transfer records showing where the $90,000 had gone after disbursement. I remember sitting in her small office, the smell of stale coffee in the air, as she slid a printed bank statement across the table toward me. The full amount was wired out within 48 hours of the loan closing, she said. Split between 2 accounts, one belonging to Riverside Manor Events and the other to a bridal boutique in Manhattan specializing in custom South Asian formalwear. Riverside Manor Events. The exact vineyard venue in the Hudson Valley Priya had been dreaming about since her engagement, the one she'd shown me pictures of a dozen times on that group text before I'd ever said no to funding it. I felt something in my chest cave inward, not from surprise exactly, but from the specific pain of having a suspicion confirmed in the most concrete, undeniable way possible. It wasn't a stranger who'd stolen my identity for random financial gain. It was my own family, using my name to buy the exact wedding they'd asked me to fund, and that I had refused, apparently deciding my refusal simply wasn't going to be the final answer. Renata had also sent the signature page to a certified forensic document examiner, a formality I'd almost forgotten amid everything else happening. The report came back a few days later with a probability rating I won't forget. 94% likelihood the signature was not authentically mine, consistent instead with an attempt to replicate a genuine signature using reference samples, meaning someone had studied my real signature closely enough to try copying its shape, but hadn't managed to replicate the subtle inconsistencies that come from years of unconscious muscle memory. "Do you have any signed documents your father might have had access to?" Renata asked, old enough that he could have used them as a template. I thought of years of birthday cards, old lease co-signings, a car title from a vehicle he'd helped me finance in my 20s, documents I'd signed 100 times in front of him without ever imagining it might someday be studied like a forger studies a painting they intend to replicate. When detectives visited my parents' house, a visit Renata coordinated with local law enforcement once the bank's internal fraud division confirmed enough evidence to escalate the case formally. I wasn't there, but I heard about it in fragments over the following days, first from a terse voicemail from my mother and later from Priya herself, calling me for the first time in weeks, her voice tight and panicked. "Dad's saying you're trying to destroy this family," she said, practically shouting through the phone. "The police showed up asking about a loan, and he's saying you sent them, that you're doing this out of spite because you didn't want to help me." "I didn't send them out of spite," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, though my hands were shaking. "I sent them because someone forged my signature and stole $90,000 in my name, Priya. That's not spite. That's identity theft." There was a long pause, long enough that I could hear her breathing shift, could hear the exact moment doubt started creeping into what I imagined had been, until then, a story she'd been fed about my supposed vindictiveness. "What are you talking about?" she said quietly. "What loan?" It became clear in that moment that Priya hadn't actually known the details. She'd known money had appeared, known the venue and the boutique had suddenly been paid in full despite my refusal to fund anything close to that amount, but she hadn't known, or hadn't let herself ask, exactly where that money had come from. I told her everything then, calmly, factually, the loan amount, the scanned ID, the wire transfers directly to her wedding vendors, the forensic signature analysis. I could hear her crying quietly by the end of it, though I genuinely couldn't tell if it was from horror at what our father had done, or grief over the wedding she now understood was unraveling beneath her. My father, when detectives eventually sat him down with the evidence laid out plainly in front of him, the scanned ID, the loan documents, the wire transfer records, the forensic analysis, folded almost immediately, according to what I later learned through the investigation's official record. He admitted to taking the old scanned driver's license from the folder in his desk. He admitted to filling out the loan application himself, replicating my signature as closely as he could from old documents he'd kept over the years. He told investigators, almost pitifully, that he genuinely believed if he could simply present the wedding as already paid for, already arranged, I would forgive the method once I saw how happy it made Priya, that the end result would somehow erase the fact that he'd stolen my identity to get there. I sat with my attorney a few days later, reviewing everything Renata's investigation had uncovered, and I had to make a decision that felt impossible in every direction. Press charges against my own father, knowing it would fracture whatever remained of our family permanently, knowing my mother would never forgive me for it, knowing Priya's wedding, the wedding she'd wanted so desperately, would collapse entirely once the fraudulent funding was clawed back. Or quietly let it go, absorb the violation, protect a family image that had already shattered the moment someone decided my consent didn't actually matter as long as they got what they wanted eventually. I thought about my divorce, about the years spent slowly rebuilding credit I'd once shared entirely with someone who no longer existed in my life, about the specific, private pride I'd taken in watching my savings account grow back from nearly nothing. I thought about how easily all of that could have vanished, how a $90,000 loan attached to my name and my social security number could have destroyed my credit, jeopardized my ability to buy a home someday, follow me through years of collections calls and credit disputes, all because my family had decided my boundaries were an obstacle to route around rather than a decision to respect. I chose to move forward with the case. The bank's internal fraud division, once they'd received the forensic signature report and law enforcement's findings, formally removed the loan from my credit file and shifted full liability back onto my father, the actual party responsible for its creation. Riverside Manor Events and the Bridal Boutique, once informed of how the funds used for their deposits had actually been obtained, froze the remaining balances and began the process of unwinding the contracts entirely. Priya's dream wedding, the one built on money stolen using my identity, collapsed within weeks, vendors pulling out, deposits clawed back, the elaborate vision that had once filled an entire group chat with mood boards and lehenga fabric swatches dissolving into nothing. My mother called me nearly every day during that period, her voice oscillating between pleading and fury, insisting I keep this within the family, insisting that pressing charges would humiliate all of us publicly, that I was choosing to destroy my father's reputation over a misunderstanding. I let her say all of it, mostly in silence, because I understood by then that no amount of explaining myself would ever make her see it the way I saw it, not as a misunderstanding, but as a violation, deliberate and calculated, carried out by someone who assumed my love for my sister would eventually excuse anything done in its name. I didn't drop the case. My father ultimately avoided prison through a negotiated plea deal, agreeing to full financial restitution and several years of probation, the specific details of which I still find myself replaying some nights, wondering if a harsher outcome would have felt more like justice or simply more like grief. Priya and Arjun ended up marrying quietly at a courthouse instead. No vineyard, no designer lehenga, no 5-tier cake. Just the two of them and 2 witnesses, a wedding no one had to steal a cent to make happen. I wasn't invited. I understood why, even if it still ached somewhere I hadn't fully mapped yet. Some bridges, once burned by something as deliberate as forgery, simply don't rebuild themselves quickly, if they ever do at all.